Good evening. You're on the show with Stephen Helfer. This is the smoking section. We've been running about 20 years now, and really like working here at CCTV, and I hope you all are enjoying CCTV also. I wanted to do a shout out to my friend Donald. He is the husband of Elizabeth, who is a former Be Live producer, and he's always given me a lot of encouragement for the show. And I always seem to run into Donald on Mass Avenue in front of the 1369. And also a shout out for my grandnephew Dylan. He doesn't watch very much, but every time I tell him I'm going to do a shout out, I forget to do it. And I guess, so tonight I'm remembering, and he will probably not watch it, which is usually the case when you do something like that. There's this ongoing thing with electronic cigarettes, and it really is interesting because they're really, even though I and many others believe all that they say about regular cigarettes is highly, highly exaggerated in terms of their harm, electronic cigarettes is really, so far, there has been no evidence that electronic cigarettes have any harm. Yet, the Food and Drug Administration, under someone named Scott Gottlieb, the director, who is actually going to be leaving fairly shortly. He's not going to stay on with the FDA, but they seem to be having a battle with with the makers of electronic cigarettes, and the FDA is now threatening to pull what are called pod-based products off the market. And I assume the Juul, which is the most popular, is a pod-based product. And Gottlieb is saying this is because there is an epidemic, which is a word that people like to use all the time. We have so many epidemics flying around, they're uncountable, but of youth vaping. And I find that very difficult to believe because I am very near the vicinity of Cambridge Ridgeland High School, and I never see any teenagers vaping. I never see any teenagers vaping anywhere in the city of Cambridge, and I really noticed everyone who is smoking. I'm always aware of when somebody's smoking, and I'm always aware of when someone's vaping, because you see often a plume of electronic vapor coming from their mouths, and I never see that with teenagers. So I really question this epidemic of teenage vaping, but I mean, even if there were many, many teenagers vaping, there is no evidence that vaping poses any harm to anyone because primarily it delivers nicotine and in water vapor, and there is no evidence that nicotine is harmful to anyone, and certainly not, I mean, they say that nicotine is a poison. We've heard that for many, many years, but it's only a poison in extraordinarily high quantities. In fact, the number of people who have died from nicotine poisoning in the last 400 years probably you can count on one hand. It just never happens. Certainly never happens with tobacco. Sometimes people working with in the tobacco fields will, from what I understand, get mildly sick from too much contact with the tobacco plants and the nicotine. I think in the last dozen years, supposedly one child out of all the millions of people who are vaping, did get a hold of a bottle of e-liquid and did die. But other than that, there is no evidence that anyone has died from electronic vaping liquid. No one certainly has ever died, as far as I know, from overdosing on cigarettes. I mean, for example, President Eisenhower is supposed to have smoked 4 packs of Camel non-filters a day. He did not overdose. He did die at the age of 78 of heart disease, but he was supposedly taking 4 packs of unfiltered Camels a day. And when he quit, he quit smoking, I don't know what age, probably in his early 70s. But when he quit, he quit cold turkey and did not experience any kind of withdrawal symptoms, certainly none of the withdrawal systems that you would expect to get with alcohol or with heroin or with cocaine, or even with coffee. People get bad headaches when they quit. But when people quit smoking, other than craving cigarettes and a few days or weeks of irritability and maybe difficulty concentrate, they experience no withdrawals significant whatsoever. So Scott Gottlieb, I read this in the Globe today, said, according to the Globe, he said, all the dramatic gains we've made reducing smoking in this country, particularly among youth, will be reversed by this product. There's no evidence, no scientific evidence that anything untoward will happen if a lot of teenagers vape. Now, probably you don't want I don't know what teenagers are going to do something, but probably watching too much video games and sitting around is certainly, that's proven health hazard. If they don't get enough activity, they get overweight. If they don't stimulate themselves with social contacts other than screens, they can become very addicted to video games and not do their homework, etc. Thus far, the FDA has produced no evidence that there is any damage to teenagers vaping. And this myth that somehow nicotine interferes with the developing brain has put to rest by Nora Volkow, who is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and she has said categorically nicotine does not do that. Unlike marijuana, which can dumb teenagers down, nicotine will not do that. So there's no evidence yet. Somehow the FDA feels it has to interfere with this industry, and the big industry is actually what used to be called Philip Morris, which is now heavily into electronic cigarettes, and this company Juul. In fact, I think Philip Morris actually owns a large part of Juul, whose advertisements on television, I think, are very, very good. I think a lot of this just has to do with control. A lot of these people who are in these federal agencies like the FDA, they like control. They like their organizations to get a lot of money. They like their organizations to get a lot of power. And I think that's it. Now, interestingly, a friend of mine sent me a study which is being done, which is ongoing, which is being led, the research is being led by a man named John Newhouse, Dr. John Newhouse, who is associated with Vanderbilt University, and he has been studying nicotine's effects in improving brain or memory in people. And he is doing a very large study that will involve 30 universities and actually recruiting right now. And the objective of this study is to see how much nicotine taken with a patch can help people with mild cognitive impairment. And in this study, he writes, nicotine is a naturally occurring chemical found in plants such as tobacco, but also in tomatoes, eggplant, and cauliflower, that when used by itself may have medicinal benefits. So according to Newhouse, who has been studying nicotine for at least 30 years, nicotine has medicinal benefits. In addition to memory loss, scientists have studied the potential for nicotine to treat depression, anxiety, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, Parkinson's disease, and even pain and obesity. In a similar study, Newhouse explains, when nicotine patch was used to treat non-smokers, there were no signs of withdrawal symptoms or cravings after stopping use of the patch. There appears to be no risk of dependency or addiction when using the nicotine patch for this purpose. So, if nicotine taken in a patch has medicinal effects, and if people who have taken nicotine in a patch, what's called a transdermal patch, that means it goes through the skin, have no cravings or withdrawal symptoms when nicotine is stopped, why should they with electronic cigarettes? Why should people say that electronic cigarettes are addictive? Of course, as we all know, almost anything can become habit forming. Certainly video games, certainly the internet, certainly Facebook, certainly fatty foods, all of these things can be habit forming, and if we stop them, we will have cravings and even mild withdrawal systems. But no evidence that people taking nicotine suffer from withdrawal or dependence or anything like that. So this whole battle that the FDA is waging, I think, has more to do with control than with health. And the other thing is, I think they feel, the FDA that is, that somehow people vaping renormalizes the idea of smoking. And I think that's what they're afraid of. They want people not even to think of smoking or not even to think of taking nicotine. It's just a total overreach on the part of the FDA and has no scientific basis whatsoever. Now, I just came across a book on Indian mythology, that is American Indian mythology, and the book is entitled North American Indian Mythology in 1961, and it gives a very, very nice description of how the tobacco plant came into existence and became such a part and parcel of American Indian culture. And this was all over the New World, all over North America, and of course South America too. But here is this particular, and I'm reading from the book right now. A young man and a girl traveled together, fell in love, and left the trail for the happiness of intercourse. They were so pleased that they agreed to marry. Later, on a hunting journey, the man returned to the place where they first united, and there found a pretty flower with scented leaves. He took it back to his people and told of his discovery. They said, "When it is dried, we will smoke it and name it Where We Came Together." The elders of the tribe claimed that because the man and the woman were so completely at peace and happy, that they continued to smoke tobacco whenever they were at council because they felt it promoted peace and friendship between tribes. And I think that's a very beautiful myth of the founding of the tobacco plant by American Indians, or at least their utilization of it. And they knew immediately that they would dry this plant and smoke it, because that is a very, very natural way to ingest plant material. People think, oh, smoking, gosh, that's really not natural. But people everywhere, all natural people living close to their, close to nature, take in plants by drying them and smoking them. So smoking and the advent of fire and the drying of plants goes way, way back in human culture, and is in fact a very, very natural thing. In fact, it's probably more unnatural to not smoke than it is to smoke. Smoking is more natural than non-smoking. As strange as that may sound, for thousands of years, people have used fire and dried plants and smoked them and gained the essence of the plant from drying them and smoking them. So when you think that smoking is unnatural, I would say it's more unnatural not to smoke. Now, I think I'm going to go to the Smoker of the Week, and sometimes I have a little trouble finding the Smoker of the Week, but we'll see how it works today. And this particular Smoker of the Week, I think, has been on before, but I'm going to give her a second go-round, and there we go. This is Princess Louise, and she was the last child of Queen Victoria. And recently, according to the British newspaper, the Telegraph, some documents were revealed showing that Princess Louise, who, if you're interested, was also considered the Duchess of Argyll, which is interesting. Of course, it's a kind of plaid that's used on socks a lot, I think, Argyll socks. I don't know how that works with British nobility, where they are the Duchess of this or the Duke of that, even though they're the daughter of the Queen, whatever. But documents recently released, or I guess, have revealed that when Princess Louise died in 1939, when she was 91 years old, she had left unpaid a bill for cigarettes to a cigarette shop near Buckingham Palace. The princess was known for her unconventional lifestyle, and according to historians was definitely a regular smoker who managed to hide the habit from her mother, that is Queen Victoria, who detested smoking. It was not until 1901, when her brother Edward VII became king, that Princess Louise could enjoy a cigarette in the smoking rooms of the royal palaces. Evidently, the royal palaces had smoking rooms, but I guess because Queen Victoria so detested cigarettes for some reason, that Princess Louise could not enjoy a cigarette in these rooms, these smoking rooms in the palaces, until her brother, Edward VII, became king in 1901. Now, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that whereas Princess Louise, the smoker, lived to be 91 years old. Her mother, Queen Victoria, who hated smoking and hated tobacco, lived only to be 81. So here we have another case where smoking, rather than being lethal, seems to have increased her longevity, if you will. But of course, that doesn't count because we only talk about anecdotes. Only count when they can be used against smoking. Anecdotes which seem to indicate that people who smoke live long or healthy, that those don't count. Those are just anecdotes. So we dismiss them. But then again, some people say, well, data is simply the plural of anecdote. So you have enough anecdotes, you can call it data. But that's the what we have about Princess Louise, the Duchess of Argyll, who is our smoker of the week, and I think probably has been the smoker of the week at least one time before. Now, exposure to secondhand smoke, especially among children, has been greatly reduced in the last 40 years. As I've said before on the show, when I was a child, all kids were exposed to smoke everywhere, and people didn't make a big deal about it. But my age cohort had a lot less asthma, for example, than the children of the last 40 years who have much more asthma. My age cohort had a lot fewer allergies to foods, respiratory allergies. Presumably, we had less autism, less ADHD. Obviously, some of these things are being, the difference in the number is because of diagnosis. But be that as it may, I was interested to see that the National Cancer Institute says that there has been a significant increase in the overall rate of childhood cancer in recent decades, up 27% since 1975 in kids under age 19. So not only is asthma going up, food and respiratory allergies going up, autism going up, ADHD going up in the cohort of persons who were never exposed to secondhand smoke, but evidently childhood cancers are increasing. When you see an increase like that fast, in a short period of time, most likely it is going to be driven by some exposure to environmental factors. So the reduction of exposure to secondhand smoke occurred at the same time that a 27% increase in childhood cancers occurred. This was said by Catherine Metayer, MD, PhD, and adjunct professor at the University of California. In the environment, a lot of things have changed. A lot of chemicals have been brought in. We are all exposed to many of them. So most likely the increase has been driven by some exposure to environmental factors combined with genetics. Well, she certainly can't say it has anything to do with exposure to secondhand smoke, because children these days are guarded like secondhand smoke. I like to think of it more or less as, if you've ever seen the movie The Exorcist, if you pour holy water on someone who's possessed by devils, they feel like the holy water burns. And people these days are so sensitive to secondhand smoke, that they feel their children are going to drop dead of a heart attack if they get a slight whiff of secondhand smoke. Yet, we're seeing many diseases increasing in children who have never been exposed to secondhand smoke, whereas again, people of my age cohort who are not only exposed to second smoke as children, but even in the womb, have very much less of these diseases. Well, thanks for listening to my alternative view on tobacco, and hope you tune in next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Good night.